Hello everyone, Comrade Snake is back, bringing you, oops, sorry for the glare, bringing Mark McLaughlin's, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Mark, War and Peace. This is the 2020 edition that came out, published by One Small Step, big redo of the classic game, and we are diving right into the 1800 Marengo scenario. I've played the other ones off camera. I'm getting used to the system, and I'm going to start jumping into the filming process here in Marengo. I want to work my way up to the grand campaign and get to there at some point, but I really want to kind of showcase a little more of the simpler version first of the game, the scenarios, a little bit. At least this one. I don't know if I'm going to do more, but at the very least, I want to do this one because it's kind of an interesting one. And I think it would be fun to film this one, and maybe move on to the grand campaign in a little bit in the next series. I also have a unboxing that I want to film, but I don't really have space for it because I still had all this out, and I've been playing different scenarios here. Not this one yet, but some of the other ones to kind of get a feel for this game. I'm not going to go into like really in depth on the specific rules because there were already videos made by other people doing that. I think Gilbert Collins did. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. Templar or something. Tabletop Templar, I think is it. Also did like one that goes into kind of more of the specific rule set for movement and fighting and combat and all that. And I will probably film particular engagements that I think have some dramatic weight or just big and cool. But otherwise, I'm going to mostly stick to just kind of moving, showing kind of the aftermath of things moving around and kind of going over what happened and the thinking behind the moves, etc. So a little historical lesson here for this. This is the War of the Second Coalition, if I remember right. This is the Second Coalition. And we have, of course, Britain and Austria at war with France. And I'm going to zoom up to places here in a moment. But there are some specific scenario rules that I'm going to explain a little bit just to give some context to how things are doing, because they do affect some of the more base stuff that's printed like on the units. And that'll change how the calculus has to be made for major actions like battles, etc. So I will explain a little bit of that for the sake of explaining the thinking of why I'm making certain moves. But the historical thing here is Napoleon has just successfully turned himself into first consul, and he is now head of he is now the most powerful person in France. And it is right as the Austrians are going once again on the offensive, and France is kind of on the back foot. So I'm going to zoom up a little bit here and get a little bit of what's going on. So the primary action of this campaign, just kind of move up a little bit here, was in Italy and in Bavaria, the two main kind of avenues, of course, that Austria and France fought over. And for the sake of the gameplay purposes, Bavaria is considered part of Austria. Just it's going to kind of matter for things like supply and attrition, etc. But like I said, I'm not going to go super into the nitty-gritty on that. But for anyone who does know how the game works but isn't familiar with the scenario, or goes and watches those other videos about the game system, you'll understand more about what I'm talking about there. So we have, and now I for my own purposes, because I prefer it this way, I have basically taken all of the what would normally be big, fairly decent-sized stacks, and I reduce them all to just 1 liter, and then I move all of those units to the leaderboards over here. So we can see some decent stacks. So this is, for example, 8 infantry strength and 2 cavalry over with Moreau. So we have, France has a decent amount of forces, but they're actually weaker than they appear, and I'll explain that in a second. And then Austria also has some fairly sizable forces on the board, as well as just kind of individual garrison units and one-off units without leaders that are just kind of sitting, like, for instance, Florence has 4 strength points of Landwehr sitting on it. But that's, let me see if I can move this down a little bit, get a little bit more legible. Yeah, there we go. It's a little better. So Massena, famous Massena, he is sitting in Genoa, which is a kind of prime target for the Austrians, because that could potentially allow the British, who are sitting with 2 strength points and a leader and don't really have a whole lot to do, but can potentially jump in if Genoa gets freed up, and we'll be able to kind of hold that city likely from a French counterattack, even with just their 2 strength points, maybe a strength point or 2 from the Austrians as well, and free up the Austrians the ability to continue pressing the attack if they so desire. And we have Melas on Milan with a sizable force, a generic leader at Mantua, but with a decent force. I believe it's 5 infantry and 1 cavalry strength, which is a decent size. And another generic leader in Venice. And then if we go up to, sorry, I'm gonna kind of readjust my camera a little bit here, tripod. So if we go up to Bavaria, Germany, lots of some individual garrisons of pretty good size up here. Along with there's some decent sized French forces, but they're still pretty heavily outnumbered. And with Cray up here, could gather a pretty sizable force to potentially attack into France proper, or at the very least significantly hold up. If he just repositions a few things around, with this generic leader possibly maybe holding here, Cray could swing up, grab forces, and try to block off these bridges, and really force the French to potentially make an unwise attack, or maybe force the French to kind of split their forces up and present an opening maybe for the Austrians to cross. So they have a lot going on there. The arguably most important piece of this puzzle is Switzerland, and historically it was the most important piece, because this gave the French, because it's under French control, it's the Helvetic Republic, a central position where Napoleon was able to kind of switch back and forth and eventually take a pretty good campaign here against the Austrians in Italy again. And as the campaign is named after the Battle of Marengo, maybe it's pronounced Marengo, not 100% familiar, but routed the Austrians, forced a peace after taking Mantua and Milan. I don't remember if he took Venice or not, or if just threatened, but either way, it forced the Austrians to sue for peace, and it was just Britain standing alone, who had no forces on the continent, so it just kind of became a stalemate for a bit, until the kind of brief peace that lasted till I believe 1804, if I remember right. Maybe it's sooner than that. I can't remember exactly the timeline of the war with Britain, which is, it was peace, but not really kind of deal with Britain and France anyway. So holding Switzerland's going to be important. We have Launay, I believe is Launay, here in Geneva with an okay-ish sized force. He's got 4 strength points of infantry, which is not terrible, but he's got more reinforcements. Kellerman can bring in some reinforcements, and they can potentially try to hold the Austrians off in Switzerland if the Austrians go for it. So the Austrians are going to have to kind of make a decision about where they want their primary effort to be, because if they try to do everything at once, they're not going to be strong enough to, unless they get wildly lucky in some battles, which is they can't rely on, they're not going to have enough strength to press everywhere, and they might end up getting nowhere. So they really need to focus on, if they want to try to focus on the south here, Switzerland, or the north. They have enough in this initial part to probably hit in decent strength 2 areas, but they're gonna have to kind of make the decision. And I'm probably, the way I'm going to do it, just kind of preempt here before we get into the real game proper. I'm going to probably push into Switzerland and Italy and try to force it that way, and see what's going on there. Oh, so interesting thing here, Napoleon. So this is the first scenario where he gets his full 3 rating. So he is the strongest commander in the game. He's always going to have a command advantage over his opponents. And he's by himself, though. There's actually no strength points in Paris. He's by himself. He's going to need to try to race to the front somewhere where he's needed. Most likely he's actually going to be the one who'll link up with Kellerman, then to Linné, and from there try to deal with the situation, which is effectively what happened historically. Yeah, so not optional, excuse me. The scenario rules, though, are a little, how should I put this? I'm not going to say favor the anti-French player, because that's not exactly accurate, because Napoleon is such a force unto himself, but there's actually an optional rule to kind of balance it out more in their favor by bringing in Charles with a separate command, which did not happen historically. And I'm not going to play with that rule because of that reason. Even though he's a level 2 commander, he's a good commander, help balance it out. But I'm going to play it historical, so to speak, with that in regard to that. So the special rules, though, other than just territory stuff and supply things, the two most important ones for this are that the French is the French morale. So I'm going to pull up a unit. So brief thing, see those little stars up there? So that's the morale of a unit. And morale has to do with combat die rolling. Having higher morale than your opponent is good. It gives you a bonus to the roll, or a negative to your opponent, depending on the situation, if you're on the defensive. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty on that, but the point is it's good for you to have higher morale. And it also affects how soon your men will flee after potentially multiple rounds of combat. Now, the French, as you can see, have 2, so they have a morale value of 2, the French infantry. And that's good. That, generally speaking, would put them... I'm going to grab an Austrian infantry. So we look at the Austrian infantry. You have 1 star. So the Austrians, broadly speaking, have less morale than the French. And sort of a qualitative difference kind of rolled into that as well a little bit. But in this scenario, it's actually reversed. The French, all French infantry have a morale value of 1, unless they are with Napoleon. Then they're normal 2 again. And all Austrian infantry have a morale value of 2, no matter what. So this is kind of to represent, at the time, the French army was in really rough shape. They had been kind of hollowed out by the constant warfare. There was still a lot of problems with command issues at the time, which is going to get straightened out by Napoleon in the following couple years. Eventually, the creation of the Grand Armée is also an administrative thing. I'm not going to get into the history of that right now, but I can ramble on these stuff for a while. Point is that unless they're attacking Napoleon, French units are actually at a disadvantage. So that's going to be important for the Austrians. They have an advantage here on the offensive, potentially. As far as reinforcements go, everybody's going to be getting a little bit every turn. The Austrians, now they have to show up, in the case of Austria, they have to show up in Budapest or Vienna, so they're going to be a little bit outside of the front. So they're going to need to get some kind of leader over there if they want to take advantage of that, to be able to move those guys later. The French get a small amount as well, but those can be deployed at Lyon, which is over here, Lyon, Paris, or at Strasbourg, so they can kind of choose where they want to throw their reinforcements. And then I am going to use one of the 2 optional rules. Like I already said, I'm not going to use the Charles rule for the Austrians. I am going to use the Moreau rule for the French. And what that is the French General Moreau, the main general up here in Bavaria, was a rival of Napoleon, and they did not get along, and he did not listen to Napoleon's plans or anything. It's just a whole mess. He has some special rules. So Moreau, if he is in a stack of French units within 6 hexes of Strasbourg, it's up there, he is automatically considered the overall commander, no matter what. So even if you were to send up a commander that was higher rating, you can't use them.
There must always be at least 5 strength points with Moreau. If he has fewer than that, no French units are allowed to move away from Strasbourg more than 6 or 5 hexes, excuse me. I'm double checking that. He has to have up to 5 strength points, and what's that? And if Strasbourg becomes occupied, though, or Moreau is killed or removed from play from getting wounded, which is you can roll to see what happens to generals during combat, then his rules no longer apply. But basically, he has to stay near Strasbourg, or rather, he doesn't have to. But if he is near Strasbourg, he has to have a certain number of troops, and he doesn't really, and he's always overall commander. So effectively, you as the French player, some of your strength is always going to be siphoned to Moreau up north, and you can't send a better commander. I can't say part Lanné up to go take command of the situation. Can't do that. Moreau has to be in command there. So that's going to potentially affect some calculations. I don't know if it's going to do too much, but basically it means I'm at a command parity with Cray, no matter what is going on there, which is unfortunate for the French player, because having even just the slight bonus of a 1+1 or -1, depending on the situation, to the die roll is always a good thing. There's not a lot of combat modifiers in this game when you're rolling, so even just a little bit like that is always helpful. And then having Napoleon is going to be crucial to the French plan, of course, because not only is he better by at least a commander at two command points better than every Austrian commander that they can bring into the scenario, he has that French morale will help equalize as well. So he's gonna be crucial. So that's kind of pretty much a wrap of the kind of base scenario. I'll get into, there's a couple specific rules about, say, British reinforcements that I could, if it comes up, I'll go into that more. But unless that becomes a situation, I'm not going to go too deep into that yet. All you need to know is if the Austrians have control over the situation in Italy and a coastal city opens up, the British will be able to get reinforcements every turn, so they can kind of keep stacking up strength points. So that can potentially, if that one of those cities does fall, that's potentially a huge problem in the long run if the French can't dislodge them quickly. So that's a good wrap of this scenario, and I will get to you next video here as we dive into. It's going to obviously this game always starts the French turn, so the French are going to go first and start figuring out how they are going to begin maneuvering to kind of try to deal with the situation. All right, so I'll see you on the next video.